The notion of Christ having direct descendants poses a profound and unsettling inquiry, one that has silently permeated centuries of history. This question, considered too disruptive for public discourse or official documentation, nevertheless endures with an almost haunting persistence. Why would the most powerful religious institution on earth so vehemently seek to obliterate any trace of such a lineage? The answer, if it exists, would shake the very foundations of belief. Such a profound enigma, a shadow of an alternative history, can be found subtly woven into the fabric of forgotten manuscripts, encoded within cryptic carvings, and carefully preserved in the hushed, whispered traditions that have been meticulously passed down across countless generations. In stark contrast, the established ecclesiastical narrative has consistently proclaimed Christ as the singular, eternal Son of God, uniquely divine and unequivocally without any earthly progeny. This foundational theological assertion stands as an unshakable pillar of faith. This deeply held conviction concerning Christ's singular nature forms the very cornerstone of the Church's enduring authority, serving as the immutable bedrock upon which an entire hierarchy of popes, ecclesiastical councils, and magnificent cathedrals have majestically risen over 2 millennia. Were it ever to be revealed that Christ had indeed fathered children, that a direct bloodline had continued through human history, then the exclusive spiritual and temporal power currently vested in Rome would be irrevocably fractured. Authority would no longer reside solely within the Vatican's hallowed walls. It would instead course vibrantly through living veins, an undeniable legacy of flesh and blood that no pontifical decree, no council's pronouncement, could ever hope to expunge. Yet one must pause and truly consider, even if only for a fleeting moment, the monumental implications such a revelation would unleash upon the world. A Christ who left behind heirs would inevitably give rise to powerful dynasties, families potentially spanning continents, each asserting a claim to divine descent. These lineages could then assert legitimate spiritual and even political dominion, not by virtue of papal blessing or ecclesiastical appointment, but by an inherent, unassailable birthright. In such a scenario, the Church would be stripped of its exclusive role as the sole custodian of divine authority and truth. It would suddenly find itself confronted by formidable rivals, perhaps even individuals or groups possessing a spiritual legitimacy perceived to be superior, walking among humanity, embodying a direct connection to the divine. Thus, the haunting, persistent question inevitably returns to the forefront of inquiry. Thelum, if such an extraordinary bloodline genuinely existed, would not the Church, in its desperate struggle to preserve its established order, deploy every conceivable measure to conceal it, to utterly silence any mention, and to meticulously inter it beneath countless centuries of carefully constructed doctrine and accumulated historical dust? A disquieting examination of historical patterns certainly provides ample reason to ponder this very possibility. Indeed, a close examination of history reveals a consistent pattern. From the earliest ecclesiastical councils, where numerous alternative gospels and differing interpretations were decisively cast aside and condemned, to the brutal inquisitions that ruthlessly punished even the faintest whispers of perceived heresy, the Vatican has demonstrably waged war not merely against sin or moral transgressions. Its true and most relentless battle has been against narratives, specifically against any story that threatened its meticulously cultivated monopoly on divine truth and spiritual authority. These were stories that dared to portray a Christ who was not solely a transcendent spirit, but also a flesh and blood Father, whose profound teachings might have continued to resonate and evolve, not merely through sacred texts and spoken words, but through the very lives of his own children. And it is precisely within this profound context that an intriguing and unsettling paradox emerges. For the more vehemently a particular notion is denied, the more ferociously it is resisted, the more powerfully does one begin to perceive the unsettling shadow of its potential veracity. Why would formidable walls of silence be erected, meticulously constructed over centuries, if there were genuinely nothing of substance concealed behind them? Why would such extraordinary efforts be expended to systematically erase a narrative if there were truly nothing significant there to be forgotten in the first place? Perhaps, then, the Church's most decisive and enduring conflict was not fought on open battlefields, heralded by the clash of swords and the flutter of banners, but rather in the suffocating quiet of hidden chambers. It was a war waged in archives meticulously cleansed by consuming fires, in ancient manuscripts deliberately smothered under layers of red ink, and in countless memories systematically suppressed and distorted. This was not a conventional war against opposing armies, but a far more insidious struggle waged against the very concept of an inheritance. It is precisely at this precarious precipice, at the very edge where official memory meets tantalizing whispers of what has been deliberately forgotten, that a profound historical journey commences. This is a narrative steeped in the chilling interplay of immense power, pervasive fear, and the deepest levels of secrecy. It is a story that dares to contemplate a hidden bloodline, one that may or may not still move, unseen and unheard, quietly among the human population even today. Therefore, it is with a measured and cautious tread, as gently as twilight descends upon the world, that this exploration must proceed. For in the profound silence that lies between the officially sanctioned pages of history, the forbidden question, like an ancient echo, continues to whisper its enduring challenge. The universally accepted narrative of Christ's life, as it has been recounted and revered for millennia, culminates dramatically upon the somber hill of Calvary. There a stark cross was raised against the vast, unforgiving sky, a crown of thorns pressed cruelly and deeply into suffering flesh, a poignant and ultimate moment of sacrifice that has resonated with profound significance through countless centuries of unwavering faith. And yet, beneath the solemn beauty and spiritual weight of this iconic image, a series of profound and unsettling questions have persistently lingered in the human consciousness. Was that truly the definitive conclusion to a life that had so radically transformed the world? Did the narrative unequivocally close with the piercing of nails and the ensuing silence of the tomb? Or could there have been something far more, a crucial chapter, a vital truth, that was deliberately left unspoken, hidden from public view? While the canonical Gospels provide remarkably clear and detailed accounts of his death, his subsequent burial, and his miraculous resurrection, they become notably less explicit, even conspicuously silent, regarding the years that immediately followed these pivotal events. They offer scant information about the subsequent lives of those who knew him most intimately. Figures such as Mary Magdalene, the closest disciples, and the various families who had journeyed alongside him throughout Galilee. These significant individuals seem to fade quietly, almost mysteriously, into the margins of Scripture. their ultimate fates shrouded in uncertainty, their personal stories left tantalizingly incomplete. Despite this scriptural void, persistent whispers, like ancient echoes, continue to resonate through time. These compelling whispers suggest that in the aftermath of the cross, not everything was definitively lost, that a delicate but remarkably enduring thread of his earthly life somehow continued, extending far beyond the confines of the tomb itself. Some of these intriguing murmurs find their origin within apocryphal texts, alternative gospels that were never officially sanctioned or accepted by the early church fathers. In the enigmatic Gospel of Philip, for example, Mary Magdalene is not merely identified as a follower, but significantly referred to as his companion, a term that, in its original context, often implied a connection far deeper and more intimate than simple friendship or discipleship. Within other such suppressed narratives, she is depicted not merely as a devoted disciple, but as someone occupying a far more intimate, profoundly closer role, perhaps even bound to him in ways that were considered too human, too earthly, for the austere tenets of official doctrine. Could it be plausible that a profound, yet unacknowledged, love story quietly shaped a hidden, untold dimension of the Christian narrative? Might it even be conceivable that from such a union a child was born, an heir whose very existence, if revealed, would have irrevocably altered the entire trajectory of faith, forever reshaping its destiny? The nascent early church, grappling with its own formation and consolidation of power, demonstrated absolutely no tolerance for such disruptive questions or alternative interpretations. At pivotal councils, convened in the shadowed, solemn halls of antiquity, texts that dared to hint at too much humanity in Christ's life, or too intimate a connection with his followers, were decisively set aside, unequivocally branded as heretical and condemned. Many were left to slowly rot away in forgotten desert caves or were deliberately consigned to vanish entirely into ash and obscurity. Orthodoxy, a singular unified doctrine, was the explicit choice, and with that choice came an enforced, pervasive silence. Yet, the imposition of silence is never truly synonymous with absence. Even as vast centuries relentlessly unfolded, faint but persistent echoes of these suppressed narratives continued to resonate. Stories were whispered furtively within the secluded walls of remote monasteries. Ancient traditions were carefully carried forward in the clandestine gatherings of secret societies, and intriguing legends subtly slipped, almost unnoticed, into the intricate tapestries of powerful European dynasties. Through all these varied channels, the same compelling refrain consistently emerged. Perhaps the dramatic events on the cross were not, in fact, the ultimate conclusion, but rather the clandestine genesis of a powerful lineage, a bloodline deemed far too dangerous to be publicly acknowledged or even named. Should this extraordinary hypothesis prove to be true, then the crucifixion, rather than being solely an ending, would instead represent a profound and deliberate veil. Behind its solemn facade, carefully hidden from the prying eyes of the world, a sacred bloodline would have quietly begun its clandestine journey through history. The very flesh of Christ, a potent seed of ancient prophecy, a living and breathing legacy. And if such an astonishing legacy truly existed, then the Vatican's long, relentless, and often brutal war against memory, against dissenting narratives, begins to acquire a chilling and disturbing logic. While the cross may have brutally silenced the man himself, the profound echoes of his life, and potentially his lineage, proved far more resilient, incapable of being so easily or completely erased from the collective consciousness. In the earliest tumultuous centuries following the crucifixion, Christianity was far from the grand, institutionalized cathedral it would later become. Instead, it existed as a fragile whisper, a clandestine current that spread quietly, intimately, from house to house. Its tenets were shared through hushed songs sung in hidden rooms, its sacred symbols carefully etched onto ancient stones by trembling, devout hands, carried forward by a community often living in fear. The mighty Roman Empire had not yet embraced this burgeoning faith. Quite the contrary. Its powerful emperors actively hunted it. Its legions of soldiers relentlessly scattered its adherents, and its devoted believers were compelled to carry their convictions like a fragile, flickering flame, carefully nurtured from town to town, often under the cloak of darkness. Yet, even amidst these scattered sparks of nascent belief, persistent rumors began to circulate. Rumors of something even more subversive, even more dangerous than the faith itself. A tangible legacy of blood. Within the very heart of the Holy Land, certain families continued to recount extraordinary stories, narratives conspicuously absent from the Gospels that were eventually approved and canonized by the early bishops. These were tales of Mary Magdalene, not merely a grieving follower, but a central figure traveling in profound secrecy, her movements carefully concealed. They spoke of children, born under the constant, ominous shadow of Rome's ubiquitous and watchful eye. These were stories that dared to speak of flesh, of human connection and lineage, rather than solely of transcendent spirit. Continuing a tradition that arguably began in the sun-drenched region of Galilee, some of these compelling tales found their careful preservation within what modern scholars now refer to as apocryphal writings, texts such as the Gospel of Thomas, the enigmatic Gospel of Mary, and the aforementioned Gospel of Philip. Each of these was decisively rejected by the powerful councils that meticulously shaped the New Testament, as it is known today. Collectively, these texts offered tantalizing fragments, intricate puzzles, and half-spoken hints of a form of Christianity that seemed less concerned with the establishment of a vast spiritual empire and far more focused on profound intimacy and personal connection. In certain of these suppressed accounts, Mary Magdalene emerges not merely as a devoted follower or repentant sinner, but as an individual who knew Christ in ways that were intimately tender, profoundly human, and perhaps unsettlingly personal. Connections that were ultimately deemed too uncomfortable for the developing official narrative. But what if her true importance, her historical role, was in fact far greater, far more pivotal, than even these suppressed accounts dared to fully reveal? Certain persistent whispers, carefully preserved through generations, claim that she was not merely a dedicated disciple, but a profound partner, an intimate companion, a trusted confidant, and perhaps even a wife. Within the intriguing pages of the Gospel of Philip, she is explicitly described as the one Christ loved more than the others, a cherished companion whom he kissed often. While the precise language of these ancient texts can be interpreted with a degree of ambiguity, the compelling suggestion undeniably lingers. Their profound bond may have encompassed a deeply human connection, as well as a spiritual one, blurring the lines between the sacred and the earthly in a way that continues to challenge conventional understanding. Should this assertion prove veracious, The ramifications would be truly prodigious. Indeed, it is posited that through her agency, a lineage of profound significance could have been initiated. The sacred essence, the very divine spark, might thus have become immanent, manifesting not merely within the ethereal realms of spiritual narratives and fervent supplications, but rather concretely within mortal offspring, ushering in a tangible, earthly continuation of the divine. One is compelled to reflect upon the trajectory of her narrative in the aftermath of the crucifixion event. Apocryphal accounts and venerable legends recount her precipitous departure from the hallowed precincts of the Holy Land. Certain narratives suggest a perilous maritime voyage across the vast expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, culminating in her disembarkation upon the sun-drenched littoral of Gaul, accompanied by a modest retinue of devoted adherents. To this day, within the picturesque southern regions of France, ancient traditions persist, bearing witness to her enduring presence. Numerous hallowed shrines dedicated to the Magdalene, intimate chapels where her venerable name has been fervently invoked for centuries, and even sacred relics purportedly belonging to her stand as silent testaments. This begs a profound inquiry. What underlying impetus fostered such fervent veneration in a locale so geographically distant from the spiritual epicenter of Jerusalem? Could the profound reason perhaps lie in her bearing something far more substantial than mere recollection of sacred events? Might it be that she carried within her a tangible, living legacy, a sacred bloodline itself? Unsurprisingly, the ecclesiastical institution meticulously toiled to meticulously regulate and circumscribe her public persona. A deliberate effort to diminish her inherent significance served as a strategic maneuver to effectively nullify any potential assertions of a sacred inheritance. Had her identity been confined solely to that of a penitent sinner, she would have been unequivocally precluded from assuming the revered mantle of a matriarch producing legitimate heirs. Furthermore, if her role was merely that of a devout adherent, she could not possibly pose a challenge to the preeminence of figures such as Peter and Paul, nor could she undermine the burgeoning authority of the subsequent papal succession. Nevertheless, despite the most assiduous and painstaking endeavors to meticulously refashion her historical account, her discernible presence, like an indelible shadow, persistently endured. Within the realm of artistic representation, she is frequently depicted with fiery red tresses, a striking visual motif that has long been interpreted as emblematic of fervent passion, enigmatic secrecy, and profound exile. Within the venerable confines of grand cathedrals, her ethereal presence subtly permeates the peripheral spaces, never occupying a truly central position, yet crucially, never entirely expunged from the sacred architecture. Moreover, in the hushed tones of clandestine traditions, she is reverently recalled as a figure of far greater import and complexity than the official ecclesiastical narrative ever permitted. Is it conceivable that the ecclesiastical hierarchy harbored a profound apprehension regarding her? That concealed beneath the carefully constructed edifice of her imposed silence resided the most profoundly interdicted verity of all, the astonishing possibility that she had, in fact, borne Christ's progeny, and that consequently, her descendants may have discreetly navigated the currents of history, their very existence systematically disavowed and suppressed, yet never utterly obliterated from the annals of time. The spectral influence of Mary Magdalene extends its elongated silhouette across the vast panorama of the centuries, and within the enigmatic depths of that enduring shadow, a poignant inquiry patiently awaits its resolution. The crux of the matter is not whether her historical significance was acknowledged, but rather whether she was perceived as possessing an unsettling degree of importance, perhaps even too much significance for the established order. During the protracted centuries subsequent to the crucifixion, the nascent and initially precarious spiritual movement, which had its humble genesis in the arid, unassuming hamlets of Galilee, burgeoned into an entity of vastly greater magnitude and formidable power. Christianity, having endured periods of intense persecution, gradually ascended to become the vital, pulsating core of a sprawling empire. This profound metamorphosis inevitably engendered a novel imperative, transcending the mere propagation of its tenets, to encompass a resolute need for absolute doctrinal and institutional control. The venerable city of Rome unequivocally stood as the epicenter of this seismic transformation. So, by the historical juncture when Emperor Constantine formally adopted the emblem of the cross, Christianity had undergone a profound ideological and structural transmogrification, evolving from a clandestine faith characterized by furtive assemblies to a prominent religion celebrated within magnificent basilicas and administered by an established hierarchy of bishops. The era of hushed supplications uttered in the obscure confines of private dwellings was definitively supplanted by the resonant, exultant chants emanating from organized choirs within opulent marble halls. What had initially manifested as a simple narrative concerning humble fishermen, unassuming shepherds, and itinerant wanderers inexorably solidified into an imposing institution governed by powerful emperors and an influential priesthood. Yet, concomitant with this exponential growth, an inherent peril emerged. Dissident voices, articulating alternative perspectives, persistently lingered within the burgeoning Christian milieu. These were the voices that cherished distinct and divergent accounts of Christ's life and ministry. They propagated narratives derived from Gospels that had not been officially sanctioned or incorporated into the burgeoning canon. Crucially, these same voices surreptitiously disseminated whispers concerning a sacred bloodline, a lineage utterly anathema and unacceptable to the nascent institutional church. One is prompted to envision the profound predicament this presented. Should Christ indeed have sired descendants, the ecclesiastical authority centered in Rome would be fundamentally incapacitated from asserting its exclusive claim to spiritual suzerainty. The very essence of divine power would then not be intrinsically vested in venerated sacred relics or in the formidable authority of the papal throne, but rather inherently within the sanctity of blood itself, manifest in living familial lines whose venerable lineage could indisputably challenge the legitimacy and prestige of any bishop, any reigning emperor, or any pontiff. Consequently, as the nascent church incrementally assumed its definitive institutional form, so too did a pervasive culture of deliberate silence concurrently emerge. Ecumenical councils were purposefully convened, not solely for the ostensible purpose of formally promulgating established theological verities, but equally, and perhaps more significantly, to systematically inter and obfuscate alternative narratives. At momentous gatherings such as Nicaea, Chalcedon, and innumerable other less historically prominent convocations, ecclesiastical bishops meticulously deliberated and cast their votes, thereby determining which texts would be irrevocably preserved as canonical scripture and which would be unequivocally condemned and expelled as pernicious heresy. The officially selected and promulgated Gospels consistently portrayed a Christ devoid of any earthly progeny, a divine figure whose earthly mission reached its conclusive and ultimate fulfillment upon the cross. Conversely, the numerous texts that were vehemently repudiated and suppressed often subtly intimated a vastly more human aspect to Christ's existence, a dimension far less amenable to institutional regulation and control. The fledgling church was compelled to exercise extreme circumspection. To acknowledge even the mere possibility of a sacred bloodline would have been tantamount to unleashing an unprecedented era of systemic chaos and profound instability. Powerful dynasties across Europe could then assert a divine right to rule, not through spiritual decree, but by virtue of their biological descent from Christ. Monarchs might legitimately trace their sovereign authority not to the imprimatur of papal blessing, but directly to the sacred soil of Galilee. Such a revelation would inevitably cause the intricately woven and meticulously constructed web of power, which the nascent Vatican was assiduously crafting, to utterly unravel and disintegrate. Consequently, theological doctrine became increasingly rigid and unyielding. Christ was formally proclaimed as unequivocally divine, eternally existent, and utterly untainted by any earthly attachments or familial bonds. Concomitantly, Mary Magdalene's historical stature was systematically curtailed, her significance considerably diminished, as she was deliberately relegated to the circumscribed role of a mere penitent sinner. Any insinuation or explicit suggestion of marriage, of offspring, or of any form of earthly continuity associated with Christ was vehemently denounced and unequivocally branded as egregious heresy. Nevertheless, the persistent nature of heterodox beliefs often ensures their remarkable survival. Certain families residing in the distant region of Gaul continued to transmit oral traditions and narratives that subtly, yet resolutely, defied the official decrees emanating from Rome. Within the secluded depths of desert caves, reclusive monks meticulously concealed ancient manuscripts containing alternative accounts that offered markedly divergent perspectives. Thus, within the clandestine shadows, other interpretations of Christ's profound legacy persevered, maintaining a hushed yet unbroken continuity through the ages. Therefore, concurrent with the Church's monumental evolution into the preeminent edifice of Christendom, it simultaneously assumed the role of the meticulous architect of an expansive silence. Every ecumenical council convened, every doctrinal decree promulgated, and every act of ecclesiastical excommunication was not merely a declarative affirmation of established faith. Rather, each constituted a deliberate and systematic act of erasure. This prompts an unavoidable contemplation. If, indeed, there was genuinely nothing to expunge from the historical record, why then was the process of effacement executed with such vehement intensity and unwavering resolve? By the dawn of the 4th century, the burgeoning Christian faith had successfully permeated and propagated itself across vast imperial territories, yet its multitudinous and disparate voices resounded in palpable discord. Certain theological factions ardently proclaimed Christ as inherently divine from the very moment of his nativity, while others contended he was fundamentally human, subsequently elevated to a state of sanctity. Furthermore, some adherents steadfastly clung to apocryphal gospels that recounted a profound intimacy between Christ and Mary Magdalene, whereas other prevailing narratives depicted him as a remote, ethereal, and altogether otherworldly figure, entirely untouched by conventional familial connections. The influential bishops presiding over the ecclesiastical sees of Rome and Constantinople recognized with chilling clarity that this pervasive theological chaos and doctrinal fragmentation could not be permitted to persist indefinitely. A unified empire, in their strategic estimation, necessitated the promulgation of a singular truth, a cohesive creed, and an unequivocal portrayal of Christ. Consequently, ecumenical councils were formally convened, solemn and weighty assemblies where esteemed bishops meticulously engaged in fervent debate, vigorous argumentation, and ultimately cast their decisive votes upon the foundational tenets that would irrevocably define the very contours of salvation itself. At the momentous Council of Nicaea, held in the year 325 CE, under the vigilant and influential patronage of Emperor Constantine, fundamental Christian doctrine was meticulously forged and indelibly inscribed, as if hammered into immutable stone. Christ was authoritatively proclaimed as begotten, not created, sharing a singular, co-essential divine nature with the Father. While the sacred doctrine of the Trinity was formally codified and sealed, the profound implications of what was deliberately omitted from these declarations proved to be equally, if not more, potent. Conspicuously absent from these foundational pronouncements was any mention whatsoever of potential heirs to Christ, nor was there any official recognition accorded to those apocryphal Gospels that subtly, yet provocatively, intimated the existence of a sacred bloodline. Consequently, those specific texts, notably the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Thomas, were systematically marginalized, unequivocally branded as egregious heresy, and ultimately consigned to a state of being surreptitiously whispered out of collective memory and official existence. This precise methodology of doctrinal consolidation and suppression was meticulously reiterated across successive centuries, at pivotal councils held in Chalcedon, at Ephesus, and indeed within the venerable city of Rome itself. With each convocation, new and increasingly refined creeds were meticulously formulated and adopted. The prevailing pattern remained consistently evident: to definitively articulate and enshrine what constituted essential belief, whilst simultaneously enforcing a rigorous and absolute silence regarding that which was deemed utterly impermissible to be uttered or acknowledged. Christ, as the perpetual and ultimate sacrifice for humanity, was affirmed with unwavering certainty. Christ, as a husband or a father, was vehemently and unequivocally denied. This stark dichotomy compels one to ponder: what necessitated such extraordinary circumspection? What fueled such an intense and pressing urgency to systematically expunge specific historical narratives? Is it conceivable that beneath the surface of those branded heretical Gospels reposed a fundamental truth deemed far too perilous for the ecclesiastical establishment to ever publicly acknowledge? The unsettling notion that the Son of God had traversed the earthly plane not solely in his capacity as a divine Savior, but also as a mortal man, potentially possessing a family whose lineal descendants might still have been dwelling discreetly amongst the populace. Every single council convened represented far more than a mere theological discourse. It constituted a sophisticated exercise in political maneuvering, subtly veiled beneath the solemnity of prayer. The deliberate act of denying the existence of a sacred bloodline served as a crucial stratagem to unequivocally secure the ascendancy of the papal throne. Similarly, the systematic obliteration of competing historical narratives was an essential tactic employed to safeguard and consolidate institutional power. For had a child of Christ indeed survived, and had a discernible family lineage been capable of authentically tracing its origins back to the hallowed region of Galilee, then the bishops of Rome would have been utterly divested of their exclusive monopoly on divine authority. Thus, the meticulously formulated creeds assumed their definitive structure, functioning not merely as profound declarations of shared faith, but rather, more potently, as formidable instruments designed to enforce an all-encompassing silence. The very act of vocally reciting the Nicene Creed became an implicit affirmation, not solely of one's devout belief in God, but also, crucially, an endorsement of the specific historical narratives and theological interpretations that the ecclesiastical establishment had deliberately chosen to consign to oblivion. Yet, even amidst the imposing grandeur of marble ecclesiastical halls and the authoritative weight of imperial decrees, persistent whispers of dissent and alternative histories continued to linger in the periphery. Certain families, often in secluded communities, meticulously transmitted peculiar and unconventional tales through generations. Within the hidden recesses of monastic libraries and remote hermitages, devoted monks assiduously guarded clandestine manuscripts that challenged official narratives. Thus, the enduring legends of a sacred bloodline persisted, thriving in the shadows, even as the formidable power of the ecumenical councils relentlessly endeavored to systematically expunge them from collective consciousness. While the formally articulated creeds explicitly instructed the devout faithful regarding the tenets they were obliged to embrace, the pervasive and enforced silence, paradoxically, narrated its own compelling story. Indeed, it is perhaps this very silence that, in its profound omissions and unspoken implications, constitutes the most profoundly revealing creed of all. It is a widely recognized historical fact that not every gospel composed during the early Christian era ultimately found its rightful place within the authoritative compilation that became the Bible. In an astonishing inversion of expectation, a greater number of these ancient texts were deliberately concealed and suppressed than were ultimately preserved for posterity. These marginalized writings were disparagingly labeled as apocryphal, heretical, and inherently dangerous texts, often left to slowly decay within the damp confines of secluded caves, meticulously sealed within protective jars, or consigned to fiery immolation by pyres specifically ignited under the explicit directives of the burgeoning church. Nevertheless, a select few of these prescribed manuscripts miraculously eluded total obliteration and endured the ravages of time. Their ancient words, even now, emanate the subtle and evocative perfume of a truth, long since deliberately obscured and largely forgotten by mainstream historical narratives. Consider, for instance, the remarkable Gospel of Thomas, an extraordinary compilation of aphoristic sayings purportedly attributed directly to Christ. This invaluable text was fortuitously preserved amidst the arid sands of Nag Hammadi in Egypt, only to be astonishingly rediscovered in the year 1945. Its teachings eloquently expounded upon the concept of an intrinsic inner light and the immanence of divine knowledge residing autonomously within each individual, thereby presenting a profoundly alternative vision of Christ, one significantly less contingent upon external ecclesiastical authority, and far more deeply intimate and profoundly personal in its spiritual implications. For the established ecclesiastical authority centered in Rome, the very existence and propagation of such a gospel represented an existential and profoundly perilous threat to its burgeoning power structure. Then there is the compelling narrative presented in the Gospel of Mary. Within its pages, Mary Magdalene is not depicted as the conventionally portrayed weeping penitent sinner, but rather emerges as a profound spiritual teacher, an esteemed bearer of esoteric wisdom, and a formidable leader whose authoritative voice evidently caused considerable disquiet among the male disciples. She articulates vivid visions and reveals profound hidden knowledge, and in assuming this pivotal role, she effectively positions herself at the very nexus of Christ's enduring legacy, a position perhaps deemed far too central and influential for the comfort and approbation of the ecclesiastical bishops who were assiduously striving to elevate Peter, Paul, and the authority of Rome to an unparalleled supremacy. Furthermore, one encounters the enigmatic Gospel of Philip, characterized by its remarkably strange and profoundly suggestive lexicon. This text explicitly delineates Mary Magdalene as Christ's intimate companion, a designation imbued with nuanced connotations of profound personal closeness and possessing etymological roots that could conceivably imply the status of a spouse. The Gospel even subtly alludes to gestures of physical proximity and affection, actions that powerfully convey not only the depth of human love, but also an intertwined divine mission. This compels a critical re-evaluation. What if the systematic rejection of these particular Gospels was not merely predicated upon subtle divergences in theological interpretation? What if their vehement suppression stemmed from the much more profound and threatening reality that they recounted a narrative utterly irreconcilable with the burgeoning institutional church's carefully constructed paradigm? The radical assertion that Christ had lived as a mortal man with a dedicated partner, and that profound human experiences such as love, marriage, and even the raising of children might have constituted integral facets of his earthly existence, would have been anathema. The ostensible justification proffered for these suppressive actions was the imperative of doctrinal uniformity, the enforcement of a singular authorized portrayal of Christ, a unified biblical canon, and an unambiguous solitary truth. However, such enforced uniformity frequently serves as an elaborate veil, cleverly disguising profound institutional fear. To acknowledge the inherent variety within early Christian thought was to court the perilous specter of contradiction, and to concede the existence of fundamental contradictions was to irrevocably jeopardize the very fabric and foundational authority of the burgeoning church, potentially leading to its complete dissolution. Consequently, these contentious Gospels were systematically interred, some in a quite literal sense, meticulously concealed within the arid confines of remote desert caves, painstakingly sealed away from the corrosive passage of centuries, their fragile pages patiently awaiting rediscovery, much like ancient time capsules. Other manuscripts, deemed irredeemably dangerous, were subjected to outright destruction, their physical forms reduced to ashes that were then scattered, metaphorically drifting into an enforced, historical silence. Notwithstanding these concerted efforts, the imposition of silence proved ultimately incapable of achieving a complete and utter erasure. Faint whispers pertaining to the existence and content of these prescribed Gospels remarkably persisted, lingering within the secluded corners of ancient monasteries, woven into the rich tapestry of legends within isolated small communities, and preserved in the subtle, often veiled references made by those courageous individuals who dared to remember and transmit what was officially condemned. The powerful Church had unequivocally declared these narratives forbidden, yet paradoxically, it is often precisely these interdicted stories that possess a tenacious resilience, finding ways to endure and survive across the vast expanse of history. One might reasonably ponder, if indeed there was no cause for alarm, why these particular texts were not permitted to endure. Why were they not allowed to be studied alongside the accepted scriptures? What profound menace did the ecclesiastical authority perceive within these writings, save for the potential revelation of a Christ, too grounded in human experience, too intimately connected to earthly affairs, too intrinsically bound to a discernible lineage? The very absence of these suppressed gospels speaks volumes, not merely through any explicit declarations they might have contained, but through their profound omission from the canon. In that void, that carefully imposed silence, one discerns a palpable hush, pregnant with unforeseen possibilities and untold narratives. Despite the zealous efforts of the established Church to quell and extinguish any dissenting voices, the tenacious nature of human memory often finds ingenious ways to permeate even the most fortified barriers. Even as ecclesiastical councils issued pronouncements of condemnation and fervent inquisitors enacted their brutal pyres, fragments of these forbidden traditions invariably discovered sanctuary in the most improbable and inconspicuous locales. Among these clandestine custodians were monks, individuals sequestered within the austere confines of stone monasteries, where the flickering glow of candlelight danced across ancient vellum pages. Officially, their solemn duty was to meticulously transcribe only the approved scriptures, the hallowed texts sanctioned by Rome. Yet the margins of these very manuscripts frequently recounted an entirely different tale. Embedded within minuscule annotations, enigmatic symbols, and deliberate omissions, faint echoes of alternative gospels and veiled lineages persisted. This was not an act of overt rebellion, but rather a subtle yet persistent form of resistance, precisely enough to safeguard the continuity of memory. Other preservers of these secrets were ordinary families, through the delicate medium of oral tradition, as ephemeral and vital as a single breath. These clandestine narratives were meticulously transmitted from one generation to the next. In remote regions, far beyond the pervasive influence of Rome, nestled within the undulating hills of southern France, and in the secluded valleys of the Pyrenees, stories were recounted of Mary Magdalene's legendary arrival by boat, perhaps with a child cradled in her arms, and of her purported descendants, who lived unobtrusively among the local villagers. Such tales were often dismissed as mere folklore, yet it is a well-observed phenomenon that legends frequently serve as repositories for truths deemed too perilous or subversive for written record. Furthermore, there existed more intentional groups, clandestine societies, some originating in the Middle Ages, while others asserted roots reaching back to epochs far more ancient. These organizations adopted distinctive symbols and rites that appeared to resonate with a hidden inheritance. Images of bees, delicate lilies, and celestial stars were carved into enduring stone, motifs that recurred across centuries, their meanings deliberately layered, their precise origins tantalizingly elusive. Was this merely a series of historical coincidences? Or was it rather the deliberate transformation of enduring memory into potent symbolism? One might recall the tragic fate of the Cathars of Languedoc, a religious sect relentlessly persecuted to the point of extinction in the 13th century. Their theological doctrines diverged sharply from those espoused by Rome, and among the gravest accusations leveled against them was the alleged possession of a secret gospel, a text rumored to contain knowledge deemed far too menacing for the Vatican to tolerate its existence. Could this clandestine scripture have subtly alluded to a sacred bloodline? Could their ruthless extermination have been motivated not solely by concerns of heresy, but by the imperative to silence a dangerously potent memory? Time and again, a recurrent pattern emerges from the annals of history. The officially sanctioned narrative proclaims a singular, accepted truth, while beneath its surface, another, half-concealed, half-forgotten, yet remarkably persistent narrative continues to flow with an undeniable undercurrent. It is almost as if history itself, with an inherent will, steadfastly refused to relinquish the profound possibility that Christ's legacy encompassed not only a spiritual dimension, but also a tangible flesh and blood reality. Consequently, this enduring memory survived not through overt defiance, but within the subtle recesses of shadows. It manifested in the intricate carvings adorning cloistered monasteries, in the vibrant stained glass of obscure chapels, and in whispered traditions that gracefully traversed the centuries, much like ephemeral smoke. The true guardians of this memory were not formidable armies or powerful institutions. They were humble scribes, unassuming peasants, and dedicated secret keepers, individuals who consciously chose the path of silence over betrayal and the sanctuary of secrecy over the specter of utter extinction. And if the memory they so painstakingly preserved were indeed nothing more than a fanciful fabrication, then why did the Church pursue its eradication with such unrelenting ferocity? Perhaps these guardians were not merely safeguarding a fantasy. Perhaps they were, in fact, nurturing the faint, forbidden heartbeat of a sacred bloodline, one that the Vatican could never countenance being brought into the public light. If indeed whispers of Christ's lineage managed to persist through the ages, where might one discern their subtle imprints? Many scholars and researchers point to the Merovingians, the distinctive long-haired kings of early medieval France, whose enigmatic dynasty held sway from the 5th to the 8th century. Their historical narrative is one imbued with glory, shrouded in mystery, and ultimately marked by an abrupt and profound erasure. The Merovingians presented a striking contrast to other rulers of their era. They conducted themselves not merely as temporal monarchs, but as figures possessing a sacred, almost divine aura. They famously abstained from cutting their hair, devoutly believing it to be a conduit for spiritual power. They laid claim to prophetic visions, miraculous gifts of healing, and a divine right to rule that appeared to emanate not from papal benediction, but from a source far more ancient, more intrinsic to their very being. Their chosen symbols were notably peculiar: bees intricately carved into stone, delicate lilies elegantly woven into their banners, and stars meticulously etched into their royal seals. For some observers, these were simply conventional emblems of power. Yet, for others, they represented profound signs, echoing an older, perhaps forgotten inheritance, a bloodline that stretched back far beyond the authority of Rome, beyond the historical boundaries of Israel, and conceivably even to Galilee itself. The Church, for a period, extended its tolerance to them, After all, the Merovingians had embraced Christianity, and their influential presence significantly aided in the propagation of the faith throughout Gaul. However, their inherent independence proved deeply unsettling to the ecclesiastical hierarchy. They did not fully submit to the dictates of Rome, nor did they rely upon papal sanction to legitimize their rule. Then they asserted their claim to kingship by birthright, and the perceived weight of their ancient blood was sufficient to cause considerable disquiet among the bishops. Then, a pivotal event occurred with Dagobert II, who was to be the last true sovereign of his illustrious line. In the fateful year 679, he met a violent end, murdered under suspicious circumstances. Historical accounts diverge on the precise method, some suggesting a spear, others a knife. Yet, what remains unequivocally clear is that his demise was sudden, highly suspicious, and remarkably convenient. Convenient indeed for the burgeoning Carolingians, an ambitious family who swiftly rose to replace the Merovingians with the explicit blessing of the papacy, and convenient for Rome, which was thereby relieved of the vexing presence of kings who asserted their authority from a source entirely independent of the Church's dominion. Even more perplexing was the aftermath. The Merovingian line was not merely unseated, it was systematically obliterated. Historical chronicles fell silent regarding them. Their royal tombs mysteriously vanished. Their names gradually slipped into the abyss of obscurity. Dagobert's son, Sigisbert, who was the rightful heir to the throne, simply disappeared from recorded history as if he had never drawn breath. Why such an exhaustive and comprehensive erasure? If the Merovingians were merely obsolete rulers, why not permit their memory to persist, even if only as a historical footnote? Why bury them so completely and thoroughly? Unless, of course, there existed something profoundly threatening within their very bloodline that necessitated an absolute and decisive silencing. Legends surreptitiously whisper that the Merovingians claimed direct descent, not merely from ancient royal houses, but from Christ himself, through Mary Magdalene, and through a child purportedly carried westward following the crucifixion. While such claims may strike one as outlandish, the sheer ferocity with which their memory was expunged from historical records strongly suggests that something far more significant than mere political maneuvering was at stake. The Merovingian enigma endures, casting a long, intriguing shadow across European history. It was a dynasty perhaps too mystical, too fiercely independent, and conceivably too sacred in its claims to be permitted to continue its reign. And if their blood genuinely carried the forbidden legacy of Christ, then their downfall was not merely a conventional political coup. It was, rather, an integral part of the Church's unspoken war against a lineage it could never, under any circumstances, allow to flourish openly. The year was 679, and the ancient forests of Lorraine lay shrouded in a heavy winter mist. It was in this desolate landscape, situated precariously on the very edge of empire and enduring legend, that Dagobert II, the last authentic Merovingian king, tragically met his predetermined fate. His story unfolds not as the quiet, natural passing of a monarch, but rather as the deliberate, calculated silencing of an entire bloodline. Dagobert, it must be emphasized, was no ordinary sovereign. Unlike the numerous puppet kings often propped up by influential advisors and powerful bishops, he bore himself with an inherent authority, fiercely independent and unyielding in his convictions. He had endured a childhood exile, hidden away within the contemplative walls of an Irish monastery, only to return years later to boldly reclaim his rightful throne. His reign, though tragically brief, was characterized by an undeniable defiance, consistently accompanied by whispers that his lineage carried something far beyond mere royal legitimacy, something profoundly older, perhaps even intrinsically sacred. And then came the fateful day of his demise. Some historical chronicles assert he was struck down by a spear while engaged in a hunting expedition. Others contend it was a meticulously planned ambush, a calculated assassination artfully disguised as a chance occurrence. What remains indisputable, however, is that the killing was swift, utterly decisive, and remarkably advantageous from a political standpoint. For one must ask, who stood to gain the most from such a swift removal? The Carolingians, an ascendant family of ambitious mayors of the palace, were poised ominously in the wings. They had assiduously cultivated favor with the papacy, pledging unwavering loyalty to Rome in exchange for crucial recognition. With Dagobert's sudden death, their path to power was dramatically cleared. Soon thereafter, Pepin the Short would be ceremoniously crowned with explicit papal blessing, thereby inaugurating a new dynasty that inextricably tethered kingship to the ultimate approval of the Vatican. Yet Dagobert had left behind a legitimate heir, his son Sigisbert, and it is here that the historical trail becomes markedly more perplexing. Sigisbert, by all rights, should have inherited his father's throne. Instead, he inexplicably vanishes from all official records. His name is barely mentioned, his life remains utterly unchronicled, and his very memory appears to have been meticulously erased. For some discerning observers, this profound erasure constitutes the most compelling clue of all. For what conceivable reason would one undertake the systematic eradication of a child from history, unless that child's very existence posed an existential threat? Legends whisper that Sigisbert was secretly spirited away to the south of France, specifically to the Languedoc region, where his descendants purportedly lived discreetly under assumed names. If these legends hold any truth, then the Merovingian line did not in fact perish with Dagobert. Instead, it subtly slipped into the shadows, meticulously preserved in secrecy, carefully hidden from the watchful gaze of the very church that had so assiduously conspired to extinguish it. This act of erasure is profoundly revealing. Political adversaries in the usual course of history are typically defeated and dethroned, but rarely are they utterly forgotten. Yet, in the case of Dagobert and his son, one observes a deliberate and concerted act of silence, almost as if the chroniclers themselves had received explicit instructions to avert their gaze. It is as if the Vatican's relentless, silent war against Christ's supposed bloodline had claimed yet another decisive victory. But triumphs founded upon silence are, by their very nature, never truly complete. In the forgotten hamlets and villages of southern France, stories stubbornly endured. Tales of a royal child miraculously rescued, of a sacred lineage subtly mingling with the common people of the land. These narratives may have been casually dismissed as mere folklore, yet they intrinsically carried within them the unsettling yet tantalizing possibility of profound truth. Thus, Dagobert's death was not merely the mundane fall of a temporal king. It represented, more profoundly, the deliberate cutting of a significant branch from a venerable tree whose ancient roots may well have extended all the way back to Calvary. And though that branch was meticulously hidden from view, the tree itself, with its deep and resilient roots, was never entirely destroyed. History, much like personal memory, is never a neutral entity. It is invariably written, meticulously shaped, and often selectively pruned by those who wield the pen of influence. And when one carefully examines the pages of early medieval chronicles, a singular silence reverberates far more loudly than any spoken words: the sudden, inexplicable vanishing of the Merovingians. For a span of 200 years, these distinguished, long-haired monarchs had exerted their dominion over the territories of Gaul. Their revered appellations were indelibly imprinted upon coinage, their legislative enactments meticulously inscribed within legal documents, and their pervasive influence was an integral part of the societal framework of the land. Yet, subsequent to the demise of Dagobert, the historical accounts become fragmented. The royal lineage that had once asserted a divine authority receded into a profound state of unimportance with astonishing celerity. The historical annals authored by the Carolingians offer scant information, presenting only disjointed pieces, often accompanied by disparaging remarks concerning Merovingian feebleness and anecdotal accounts trivializing their period of governance. Dagobert's direct descendant, Sigisbert, is almost completely absent from historical notice. He ought to have been accorded recognition, formally recorded, and perhaps even ceremonially crowned. Instead, his memory dissipates into an inexplicable void, as if his very being posed a menace too profound to be officially recognized. What could account for such a comprehensive obliteration? Vanished royal houses are typically preserved in collective memory, if only to serve as admonitory narratives. But the Merovingians were not merely defeated, they were systematically expunged. Their sepulchres were left untended, their lineage conspicuously disregarded. Even their emblematic representations, the industrious bees, the graceful lilies, the celestial stars, gradually receded from formal application, persisting solely within disparate oral traditions and dimly recalled architectural embellishments. A segment of historical scholars posits that this was a matter of political pragmatism. The ascendant Carolingians, striving to solidify their own legitimacy, found it imperative to diminish the stature of those who came before them. Yet, the thoroughness of this historical expurgation intimates something beyond mere convenience. It points towards deliberate intention. Should the Merovingian line indeed have possessed the murmured heritage of Christ, transmitted through Mary Magdalene and her alleged progeny, then their continued presence would have profoundly destabilized the authority of the papacy. Envision extant successors whose very veins coursed with a divine entitlement. Consider competing sovereigns who could assert their right to govern, not through the sanction of the pontiff, but by virtue of an inherent, hallowed ancestry. Such a formidable prospect was utterly unacceptable. Consequently, profound silence emerged as the most potent instrument wielded by the Vatican. Historical archives underwent a meticulous purification. Narratives of the past were meticulously re-scripted. In the place where a powerful royal house once held sway, only a profound void now persisted. However, the very phenomenon of absence often narrates its own compelling tale. It becomes discernible within the lacunae, in the abrupt, empty expanses where significant appellations ought rightfully to have been inscribed. It resonates in the subdued tone of historical accounts, that meticulously detail myriad events, yet conspicuously omit that which held paramount importance. It is palpable in the enduring tenacity of folklore, which defied official refutations, tales of concealed progeny, of ancestral lines meticulously safeguarded, of profound verities interred far more deeply than any sepulchre. This profound quietude is far from vacuous. It carries immense gravity, imbued with intention, reverberating with the substantial import of what was systematically expunged. Indeed, as every discerning historian readily acknowledges, the true narrative frequently commences precisely within such moments of profound quiet. Subsequent to the eradication of the Merovingian presence, the geopolitical configuration of Europe underwent a profound transformation. The void they bequeathed did not persist in its emptiness for an extended period. Into the resultant quietude emerged the Carolingians, a powerful lineage whose pivotal alliance with the Holy See was destined to fundamentally alter the trajectory of the Christian world. The Carolingian rulers did not originate from hallowed myth or ancient prophecies. They were by nature pragmatic individuals, skilled managers of royal households, exercising concrete influence rather than relying on an aura of mystique. Pepin of Herstal, the formidable Charles Martel, and Pepin the Short. These were personages defined by their strategic acumen and formidable political might. However, the bedrock of their authority lay not in an inherited lineage, but in strategic alliances. They firmly affixed their destiny to Rome, and the Holy See, in reciprocal fashion, bestowed its divine approbation upon their rise to prominence. The papacy, beleaguered by a multitude of adversaries, was in dire need of staunch protectors. The aggressive Lombards exerted relentless pressure from the Italian peninsula. Heathen tribes cast ominous shadows along the borders, and competing imperial factions vied for dominion over the very core of Europe. During such tumultuous eras, a reigning house demonstrably loyal to Rome held far greater value than one merely connected to ancient, perhaps forgotten, legends. Thus, when Pepin the Short orchestrated the removal of the final, largely symbolic Merovingian monarch, the pontiff himself formally endorsed this decisive action. A truly momentous event subsequently transpired. In the year 754, Pope Stephen II personally consecrated Pepin in a solemn, sacred rite. This marked the inaugural instance of a pope bestowing a crown upon a sovereign, thereby instituting a powerful precedent that would reverberate throughout subsequent centuries. Royal legitimacy no longer exclusively originated from hereditary lineage. It now emanated directly from the imprimatur of papal sanction. The Holy See had thus definitively cemented its prerogative, ensuring its enduring influence would perpetually direct the destiny of royal authority. Yet, one might reasonably inquire, what rendered this particular development so profoundly significant? It is plausible that the lingering remembrance of the Merovingian kings continued to resonate. Should the faint murmurs of their hallowed ancestry indeed have endured, then the ecclesiastical institution required a ruling house over which it could exert absolute dominion, a dynasty whose authority was inextricably linked to and derived solely from papal approbation. The Carolingian dynasty proved to be an ideal candidate for this precise function. Their legitimacy was not a legacy bequeathed by ancient lore, but rather an endowment directly bestowed by the very authority of Rome. This fundamental alteration transcended mere political maneuvering. It carried profound symbolic weight. Through the sacred anointing of Pepin, the Vatican unequivocally proclaimed to the entire world, "It is solely within our purview to determine who shall reign, and it is we who impart divine sanction." Hereditary lineages, regardless of their enigmatic nature, were now relegated to a subordinate position. The ultimate seat of power, the veritable throne, resided with Rome. Nevertheless, beneath the resplendent pageantry of royal coronations and the solemn gravitas of ecclesiastical councils, one is compelled to ponder. Did the Vatican's fervent zeal to elevate the Carolingian line simultaneously conceal an equally ardent desire to enter the Merovingians even more profoundly, thereby guaranteeing that no vestige of memory concerning Christ's alleged descendants could ever challenge the newly established ecclesiastical hierarchy? For if the Merovingian dynasty genuinely bore that prescribed heritage, then their displacement transcended mere political machination. It constituted an unequivocal act of systematic obliteration, a conclusive endeavor to sever the very thread of an ancestral line that possessed the potential to irrevocably transform the foundational tenets of the Church. The Carolingians ascended to power. Rome's authoritative grasp became increasingly formidable, and the recollection of the hallowed monarchs of France gradually receded into the realm of myth. Yet, as the annals of history repeatedly demonstrate, legends possess a remarkable tenacity. Even as the Merovingian presence dimmed within historical records, and the Carolingian star ascended under the benevolent gaze of papal patronage, vestiges of the prescribed narrative persisted in realms untouched by the scribe's quill. Not within the confines of vellum scrolls, nor in the pronouncements of ecclesiastical assemblies, but indelibly etched in enduring stone. Within the venerable abbeys of Burgundy, amidst the grand cathedrals of the Languedoc region, and within secluded chapels nestled deep within the undulating topography of the Pyrenees, intriguing symbolic representations frequently manifest. Illustrations of bees intricately grouped around sculpted archways, elegant lilies interwoven into architectural capitals, and celestial stars meticulously incised into the walls of monastic cloisters, places where no celestial observer would logically have cause to delineate the heavens. These emblems recur with striking regularity, as if intentionally, subtly placed for the perspicacious few who possess the acumen to decipher their latent meanings. The depiction of the bee was no mere decorative motif. For the Merovingian monarchs, it functioned as a hallowed emblem, signifying regeneration and perpetual existence. Upon the systematic obliteration of their ruling house, the bee ought, by all logical accounts, to have disappeared alongside them. Nevertheless, it persisted, concealed within intricate carvings, meticulously embroidered into ecclesiastical vestments, and surfacing in locations considerably distant from any official armorial bearings. Did skilled stonemasons and cloistered monks intentionally safeguard it as a mnemonic device, as a subtle act of defiance, or as a hushed intimation of an ancestral line that Rome fervently desired to consign to oblivion? The elegant lily likewise blossoms with an air of profound enigma. Although it would subsequently acquire renown as the fleur-de-lis, the quintessential emblem of French regality, its genesis is considerably more ancient, intrinsically linked to concepts of fecundity, unblemished purity, and concealed lineage. Within sanctuaries reputed to have been established by Mary Magdalene herself, the lily reappears with striking frequency, as if serving to gently remind adherents that an alternative narrative, a distinct origin, lies concealed beneath the officially sanctioned account of the ecclesiastical institution. And finally, the celestial stars, intricate patterns meticulously carved into ceilings, constellations depicted with a precision that no medieval artisan could have achieved with mere visual observation. Some configurations distinctly delineate the mighty hunter Orion, while others portray the radiant morning star. Was this cosmic alignment merely an aesthetic embellishment, or did it subtly allude to more ancient, profound mysteries, to ancestral lines traced not solely through the temporal progression of history, but through the very fabric of the cosmos? Beneath the enduring solidity of stone, a profound quietude resides. Yet even silence possesses the capacity to articulate narratives. The precise positioning of these enigmatic symbols strongly implies deliberate intent. They are never prominently displayed, nor are they overtly declared. Instead, they are relegated to the periphery, secreted away in obscure nooks, incised into surfaces where only the most attentive observer would ever discover them. These are not grand proclamations, but rather hushed, persistent whispers. It is conceivable that the master masons who meticulously carved these emblems were privy to narratives discreetly circulated among monastic communities. Perhaps the local inhabitants who offered devotion beneath these carvings recounted ancient legends of Mary Magdalene's arrival in Gaul accompanied by a child. It is entirely plausible that these symbols were not arbitrary artistic choices whatsoever, but rather deliberate acts of remembrance, subtle insurgencies against the Vatican's systematic expurgations. For while the pronouncements of the papacy possess the power to consign ancient manuscripts to flames and to impose silence upon ecclesiastical synods, they cannot so readily obliterate the enduring testimony of stone. Thus, the elusive whispers endured, not articulated in spoken or written language, but embedded within symbolic forms, largely overlooked by the majority, yet patiently awaiting those perceptive eyes prepared to discern their meaning. And when we do perceive them, a profound inquiry ascends, much like fragrant incense. Were these simply ornamental embellishments or profound messages transmitted across the span of centuries? Were they merely artistic creations or vital testaments preserved within the hushed arches of long-neglected sanctuaries? The very stones themselves appear to softly murmur a profound truth. The narrative has not been irrevocably lost. It has merely been artfully concealed. By the advent of the Middle Ages, the Holy See had transcended its ecclesiastical origins, evolving into something far grander than a mere religious institution. It had solidified its position as an empire of the spiritual realm, its pervasive influence extending across the vast expanse of reigning monarchs and sovereign territories. Yet, empires are seldom constructed solely upon the bedrock of spiritual conviction. They are fundamentally predicated upon the meticulous exercise of dominion. And Rome, with an unsettling meticulousness, had brought the intricate apparatus of control to a state of chilling perfection. Central to this formidable machinery was the notorious Inquisition. Originating in the 12th century, it was initially conceived as an instrument to systematically eradicate heterodoxy. However, the definition of what constituted heresy was not invariably a rejection of Christ himself. More frequently, it denoted an adherence to an erroneous conception of Christ. A Christ perceived as excessively human, too intimately connected with Mary Magdalene, or too inextricably linked to the notion of a direct lineage. The inquisitors themselves were rigorously trained, not merely in theological dogma, but in the insidious arts of interrogation. Their probing inquiries functioned as psychological instruments, more incisive than any blade, meticulously engineered to extract admissions from even the most resolute silence. Individuals accused of possessing prescribed manuscripts or of discreetly circulating perilous legends were forcibly brought before tribunals illuminated by flickering torchlight. There they faced judgment, not by a jury of their equals, but by the relentless apparatus of Rome itself. And should they prove unwilling to confess, the consuming flames would ultimately accomplish what even the most profound silence had failed to achieve. Papal decrees and bulls proliferated, each successive pronouncement serving to progressively constrict the confines of orthodox belief. Whole communities faced condemnation for their unwavering adherence to esoteric doctrines. The Cathars inhabiting the southern regions of France were summarily branded as heretics and systematically eradicated during the brutal Albigensian Crusade. Officially, their transgression was identified as dualist theology. However, subtly concealed within the formal accusations were veiled allusions to a book of love, a purportedly lost gospel rumored to enshrine verities deemed excessively perilous for the Roman establishment. Truths perhaps intimately connected to the very bloodline of Christ. Why did such an intense ruthlessness define these actions? Why did entire settlements fall to the torch? Thousands perish in brutal massacres, and whole cultural heritages face obliteration. If the ancient narratives were mere figments of imagination, if the whispers of a sacred lineage were nothing more than unfounded gossip, then what compelled such an immense expenditure of power to utterly silence them? The compelling answer, it is often argued, may well reside in a profound institutional dread. For an organization whose very foundation rested upon the singular, undisputed divinity of Christ, the mere notion of his having descendants was an existential threat, a virulent poison. Should a child of Christ indeed have survived, then the ultimate divine sanction would no longer be enshrined within the venerable walls of the Vatican, but rather embodied in living, breathing individuals, quietly traversing the annals of history. Rome's formidable authority would not merely face a challenge, it would be irrevocably shattered, its spiritual dominion crumbling into dust. Consequently, the intricate machinery of suppression continued its relentless operation. Ecclesiastical councils convened to issue pronouncements, zealous inquisitors embarked on their relentless hunts, and invaluable archives were systematically purged of inconvenient truths. With each passing generation, new components were added, fresh gears, more efficient levers, stronger chains, enhancing the system's formidable grip. The Vatican, in this light, was not solely engaged in the preservation of faith. It was, more fundamentally, defending its very existence against the perilous specter of an inconvenient memory. And yet, the very magnitude and unwavering force of its opposition inherently suggest that something of profound significance, something truly deserving of such drastic erasure, may indeed have once existed. The intensity of the suppression, paradoxically, lends credence to the suppressed. For true power, discerning and pragmatic, does not squander its formidable resources battling ephemeral shadows or baseless fictions. The formidable institutional apparatus of the Vatican, thus transformed into a potent weapon, not against physical armies or rival nations, but against the very act of remembrance itself. It was deployed against a lineage that, while never officially acknowledged, could also never be entirely expunged from the collective consciousness. And in the profound, unsettling silence that remained in the wake of such determined efforts, the unanswered questions only amplified, echoing with greater insistence through the corridors of time. History, in its truest form, is not solely comprised of that which endures and is meticulously documented. It is equally defined by that which is irrevocably lost, by the voids and lacuna in our understanding. When one meticulously scrutinizes the ecclesiastical archives, the ancient monasteries scattered across Europe, and the once flourishing libraries that teemed with countless scrolls of parchment and vellum, a singular and inescapable truth emerges with stark clarity. An alarmingly vast quantity of knowledge has simply vanished. Some of these losses, it is readily conceded, were the unfortunate consequence of natural calamities and the relentless march of time. Devastating fires frequently swept through venerable abbeys, reducing shelves laden with centuries of wisdom to mere heaps of ash. Pervasive dampness caused precious vellum to rot and disintegrate. Insidious insects gnawed relentlessly at fragile ancient pages. Time itself, an indifferent and insatiable devourer, ultimately claimed much that human hands, despite their best efforts, could not adequately preserve. However, other losses bear the unmistakable imprint of deliberate human agency. These were not random acts of decay, but rather intentional, selective, and highly purposeful acts of destruction. Time and again, historical records allude to manuscripts explicitly ordered to be destroyed, gospels deliberately excluded from the canon by powerful councils, chronicles that dared to contradict the established official narrative, and writings that spoke with an alarming audacity of Mary Magdalene, or even more controversially, of potential heirs. Some of these forbidden texts were consigned to the flames in public spectacles, their rising smoke and crackling infernos serving as a stark, unmistakable warning to any who might harbor similar dissenting thoughts. Others simply vanished with quiet efficiency, systematically removed from library catalogs, leaving behind only faint whispers and obscure footnotes to suggest that they had ever, in fact, existed. Consider, for instance, the Vatican's own formidable archives. Buried deep within the ancient city of Rome lie many miles of shelving, meticulously guarded for countless centuries. Access to this vast repository of knowledge is granted only to a select, privileged few. Even those scholars who have been fortunate enough to glimpse its extensive catalogs report unsettling anomalies, missing volumes, inexplicable gaps in the numbering sequences, and titles conspicuously struck through with vivid red ink. One cannot help but ponder, were these invaluable records lost purely by accident, or were they deliberately silenced, their contents deemed far too perilous to be permitted to survive into modernity? Reflect also upon the poignant fate of the Cathar texts. When the formidable mountain fortress of Montségur finally capitulated in 1244, ancient legends recount that a small, determined band of devout believers managed to smuggle out a great treasure. Some speculate this treasure was a cache of gold. Others whisper of a sacred book, perhaps a crucial manuscript that directly linked Christ to a hidden earthly lineage. Whatever its true nature, it never again resurfaced, as though the very earth itself had opened to swallow and protect it from the relentless, consuming fire of Rome's persecution. And then there are the tantalizing, scattered hints that pepper surviving historical documents, fleeting references in letters to gospels we no longer possess, mentions of ancient traditions that mysteriously disappear from the record after a certain century. The Gospel of the Hebrews, the Gospel of the Egyptians, the enigmatic Book of Love, each name acts as a metaphorical doorway, now firmly bricked up, leaving us to endlessly speculate about the profound truths that might have been concealed behind them. The widespread vanishing of these manuscripts, it must be stressed, does not constitute definitive proof of a bloodline. However, it undeniably serves as compelling evidence of a pervasive, deep-seated fear. Institutions of power do not resort to the burning of paper unless that paper fundamentally threatens their established authority. They do not systematically erase historical records unless those records contain something they simply cannot afford to allow to endure or be publicly acknowledged. And so, we are left with a resonant silence where articulate words should have once stood, an unsettling absence where a continuous history should have flowed, and perplexing gaps where an unbroken narrative of human experience ought to have provided clarity. Yet even in the face of such profound loss, memory, tenacious and resilient, invariably finds a way to survive. Legends, vibrant and enduring, spontaneously arose around these missing texts, as if the very act of their erasure paradoxically caused them to shine with an even greater brilliance in the fertile landscape of human imagination. What was physically consumed by fire may be irrevocably gone, but what was whispered in hushed tones, passed down through generations, has remarkably endured. And perhaps, in a profound twist of irony, that is precisely why these manuscripts ultimately vanished. Not because their contents were insignificant or meaningless, but precisely because they carried a weight of meaning too profound, too dangerous, to be allowed to openly circulate. For in the shadowy, often overlooked corners of history, the eloquent absence of words can, at times, constitute the loudest and most compelling testimony of all. By the advent of the 12th century, the persistent whispers concerning Christ's potential hidden lineage had seemingly found new, formidable guardians. A unique order of warriors sworn not only to the rigorous demands of battle, but also to a profound, unwavering silence. They were officially known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, though history would immortalize them simply as the Knights Templar. Officially, their solemn duty was to act as stalwart protectors of Christian pilgrims journeying along the perilous roads to Jerusalem, and as valiant defenders of the Holy Land itself. However, beneath their iconic white mantles, conspicuously emblazoned with striking red crosses, enduring legends suggest they harbored a far more clandestine and profoundly significant mission. Some accounts claim they unearthed invaluable relics buried deep beneath the venerable Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Other whispers, more intriguing still, contend that they discovered ancient manuscripts, meticulously concealed for centuries within the shifting desert sands. Treasures not of glittering gold or precious jewels, but of an extraordinary, transformative knowledge. What precisely was the nature of this enigmatic knowledge? Rumors persist, speaking of ancient scrolls that unveiled a deeply human aspect of Christ, compelling evidence of a marriage, of legitimate heirs, of a sacred bloodline that the established church had so vehemently sought to eradicate from historical memory. If such profoundly significant documents indeed existed, the Templars, it is theorized, may have undertaken their solemn guardianship, meticulously transporting them across the vast expanse of Europe in utmost secrecy, meticulously concealing them within their widespread network of commanderies, stretching from the bustling streets of Paris to the sun-drenched shores of Portugal. Initially, the Vatican extended a degree of tolerance to the burgeoning Templar order. They proved immensely useful, possessing vast wealth and considerable power. They constructed formidable fortresses, safeguarded vital trade routes, and even provided crucial financial backing to various European monarchs. Yet, as history repeatedly demonstrates, unchecked power invariably breeds suspicion, and the Templars' remarkable independence soon escalated into a perilous liability. They professed allegiance to no earthly king, only to the reigning pope, and even that once unquestioning allegiance began to fray, becoming increasingly uneasy and strained. By the early 1300s, a torrent of rumors concerning heresy began to swirl ominously around the order. Whispers spoke of strange, secretive rituals, of hidden initiations veiled in darkness, of shocking accusations of idol worship, of sacrilegious acts like spitting upon the cross, and of unspeakable secrets deemed too dark and blasphemous to utter aloud. Officially, these grave charges provided the convenient justification for their brutal and wholesale destruction. But perhaps the underlying truth was far more complex and insidious. Perhaps the Templars' most unforgivable transgression was not, in fact, heresy, but rather their possession of a profoundly dangerous secret that Rome, under no circumstances, could permit to ever surface and become public knowledge. On that fateful Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, the relentless machinery of erasure struck once more with devastating precision. Templar knights across the entirety of France were arrested en masse at dawn, their immense wealth summarily seized, and their revered leaders subjected to horrific torture in a desperate bid to extract confessions. At the pyre, Grandmaster Jacques de Molay met his agonizing end in the consuming flames, yet, according to legend, with an unyielding defiance on his lips. Some accounts claim he uttered a powerful curse upon the very pope and king who had condemned him. Others maintain that he carried his profound secret, unspoken and unbroken, directly into the inferno. What then ultimately became of the Templars' rumored hidden knowledge? Some fervent believers contend that it was cunningly smuggled away prior to the widespread arrests, carried to safety by those knights who managed to escape, fleeing to distant lands like Scotland, Switzerland, and Portugal. In each of these locales, legends of hidden treasures continue to linger, treasures not of mere coin or bullion, but of an invaluable, liberating truth. Could it be that the Knights Templar did indeed meticulously preserve tangible evidence of Christ's bloodline? Could their catastrophic downfall have been not merely a calculated political maneuver orchestrated by the French king, but an integral, crucial part of the Vatican's silent, centuries-long war against memory itself? We may, in the end, never definitively ascertain the full truth. Yet, the remarkable persistence of these compelling rumors, enduring for centuries after the complete annihilation of the order, strongly suggests that the Templars carried far more than just polished swords. They carried enigmatic shadows, tantalizing whispers, and perhaps even the scattered fragments of a legacy deemed far too perilous for the established church to ever tolerate or endure. And though their once mighty order was utterly broken, their profound mystery continues to live on, stretching like a resilient thread through the intricate labyrinth of human history. When the evocative word Grail reaches our ears, most people instinctively conjure an image of a sacred cup, a chalice famously believed to have collected the precious blood of Christ at the moment of his crucifixion. It is perceived as a mystical vessel, fervently sought by valiant knights, meticulously hidden within ancient castles, and glowing with an ethereal light in the annals of legend. Yet, beneath this universally familiar and cherished image, there lies an alternative interpretation, one that radically reshapes the entire narrative of the Grail itself. What if the Grail, in its truest essence, was never a mere cup at all? What if, instead, it represented a sacred bloodline? This provocative idea does not spring from mere fantasy or whimsical conjecture, but rather finds its surprising roots in the very structure of language. In Old French, the phrase sang royal directly translates to royal blood. Over the passage of time, through subtle linguistic shifts and phonetic blurring, this phrase gradually transformed into Sangreal, which subsequently became the Holy Grail. This was a subtle but profound shift of letters, leading to an equally significant shift in meaning. What originally began as a direct reference to blood, to a lineage, was gradually reimagined and reinterpreted as a tangible object of spiritual quest. This transformation was indeed subtle, yet it effectively obscured a truth deemed far too dangerous and subversive to ever be openly spoken aloud. Knights, in the vibrant tales recounted by troubadours and immortalized in the rich tapestry of Arthurian romances woven across medieval Europe, earnestly embarked on quests for the Grail. These captivating stories, upon closer examination, shimmer with profound allegory, a precious vessel, meticulously hidden, zealously guarded, and fiercely protected, or alternatively, a sacred lineage, carefully preserved, shrouded in secrecy, and strictly forbidden from public knowledge. Could it truly be that hidden beneath the heroic narratives of Percival and Galahad lay profound echoes of a far deeper truth? That the Grail was not merely a holy relic from which to drink, but rather a sacred family, a cherished bloodline that required unwavering protection. The symbolism only deepens when we consider the prominent figure often intimately linked with the Grail, Mary Magdalene. In certain esoteric traditions, she is not merely regarded as a silent witness to Christ's life, but is, in fact, considered the Grail itself. She is conceptualized as the living vessel who carried Christ's precious blood, not within a ceremonial cup, but within her very womb. The child of Christ, born in profound secrecy, thus becomes the living Grail, a sacred legacy of flesh and blood, rather than of material gold or precious artifacts. The established church, for its part, actively promoted the chalice interpretation, a simple, distant, and safely ethereal relic, a quest that undeniably inspired fervent devotion, but never posed any fundamental threat to its entrenched doctrine. Yet, the alternate reading, the Grail as a living bloodline, was immeasurably more perilous, for it implied that the sacred legacy of Christ did not definitively conclude at the cross. Instead, it suggested that it lived on, continuing through generations of descendants who might, even now, walk among us, unseen and unacknowledged. Perhaps this is precisely why Grail legends proliferated with such remarkable intensity during the 12th and 13th centuries. The very same tumultuous era in which the Knights Templar rose to prominence and then met their dramatic, tragic downfall. Perhaps these captivating stories were, in essence, coded narratives, ingenious ways of articulating profound truths that could not be openly or directly expressed. Troubadours and poets, through their art, may have subtly embedded vital secrets within their verses, crafting songs that simultaneously entertained the masses while carefully carrying vital whispers to those few discerning individuals who possessed the rare wisdom to truly hear and comprehend them. If the Grail is indeed interpreted as blood, then the grand, overarching medieval quest was not for a tangible object, but rather for an even more fundamental pursuit: the survival, the enduring preservation of a hidden and sacred lineage. The valiant knights who embarked upon this quest were not merely chasing an elusive cup, but were, in fact, protecting precious heirs, and the Grail itself, so often depicted in legend as elusive, eternal, and ultimately unattainable, may simply represent the continuous, unbroken flow of a legacy that the Vatican, with immense and tireless effort, consistently labored to utterly erase. And so the sacred chalice persists, neither truly discovered nor utterly lost, but rather perpetually re-envisioned. It exists as a narrative embedded within a grander narrative, a profound secret veiled within a potent emblem, and perhaps, in the very quietude of the ecclesiastical establishment's staunch refusal to acknowledge its alternative interpretations, the Grail's most profound significance shines with an unparalleled clarity. The bedrock of power resides not merely in the unwavering devotion of the faithful, but crucially, in the meticulous regulation of succession. The papacy, with its shrewd political acumen, grasped this fundamental truth more comprehensively than any temporal monarchy. From the nascent centuries of its formation, the Church assiduously labored to guarantee that divine sanction and authority flowed through one singular, consecrated conduit, exclusively through Rome, thence through its pontiffs, and ultimately through an intricately woven hierarchy deliberately unmarred by the vagaries of biological lineage. Yet, what if this meticulously constructed chain of authority could be fundamentally challenged? What if the Christ figure had, in fact, bequeathed heirs, living descendants whose very corporeal existence and sacred bloodline profoundly undermined the Vatican's exclusive dominion over spiritual truth and divine legitimacy? This was the profound apprehension that permeated the hallowed corridors of the Lateran Palace and echoed through the august assemblies convened in its marble-clad halls. A Christ who had begotten children would inevitably give rise to powerful dynasties possessing an inherent, sanctified claim to authority. These would be rival thrones, their legitimacy bestowed not by the customary papal blessing and anointing, but by an intrinsic, unassailable lineage itself. In such a revolutionary paradigm, kings might ascend to power, boldly proclaiming their direct descent from the ancient lands of Galilee. Queens might assert their right to rule, their authority rooted not in the ceremonial grandeur of coronation rites, but in the inherent sanctity of their blood. Within a world thus transformed, the Church's once unyielding grip on both spiritual and temporal affairs would inevitably falter, its formidable power diminished from substantive rule to a mere collection of symbolic observances. This was the unarticulated terror, the pervasive and deeply unsettling fear of an alternative succession. Historical annals offer compelling glimpses into the profound depth of this ecclesiastical anxiety. What other compelling reason could explain the Vatican's strategic decision to anoint kings of its own choosing, from the foundational figure of Pepin the Short to the formidable Charlemagne, thereby binding these monarchs to the indispensable imprimatur of papal approval? Why else would it meticulously erase entire dynasties, such as the enigmatic Merovingians, whose perceived legitimacy appeared to emanate from a source far predating and therefore beyond the control of Rome? Why, indeed, would it relentlessly incinerate ancient manuscripts that dared to portray Christ as a devoted husband, a loving father, a fully dimensional man? Every single one of these decisive actions points towards a singular, overriding imperative: to absolutely ensure that no rival bloodline, claiming a sacred heritage, could ever possibly emerge or gain traction. Consider, for instance, the epical coronation of Charlemagne on that fateful Christmas day in the year 800. Within the majestic confines of the Grand Basilica of St. Peter's, Pope Leo III ceremoniously placed a crown upon the head of the burgeoning emperor. This act transcended mere ritualistic pomp. It was a resounding and unequivocal declaration. It asserted that true authority did not stem from inherited blood, but emanated directly from Rome. No potential heir of Christ, however legitimate their claim, could ever rival the papacy's divinely chosen champion. Yet the very intensity and public spectacle of this pivotal ritual inadvertently reveal its antithesis. If the Vatican found it necessary to display its formidable power with such overt boldness, it was precisely because the ominous shadow of another unseen succession loomed large. The disquieting whispers of potential heirs, of clandestine families, of sacred bloodlines that had somehow eluded the meticulous grasp of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. This pervasive fear of an alternative succession profoundly explains the ferocity inherent in Rome's meticulously maintained silence on the matter. For the principle of succession constitutes the very essence of institutional survival. To even countenance the mere possibility of Christ's biological lineage was to invite an apocalyptic future wherein the Vatican would no longer serve as the exclusive gatekeeper of salvation, where pontiffs would be reduced to but one voice among many, and where the true living heirs of Christ would speak with the inherent, irrefutable authority of their corporeal connection. And so, the Church embarked upon a protracted conflict, silent yet relentless, waged across the vast expanse of centuries. It was a war fought not with the clash of swords and the might of armies, but with the subtle yet pervasive power of erasers, not with military campaigns, but with legislative pronouncements and doctrinal decrees, and always persistently flickering behind this unseen struggle, like a solitary candle in the encroaching darkness, was the same profound and unsettling question. If there was truly nothing to fear, why then was the prospect of succession so profoundly dreaded? Doctrine serves as the intricate scaffolding of the Church. It bears the immense weight of collective belief, meticulously binding millions of adherents into a singular faith, a unified voice, a cohesive and sacred narrative. But what happens when a single, inconvenient truth threatens to fundamentally fracture this entire, carefully constructed edifice? For the Vatican, the mere contemplation of Christ's bloodline was far more than a mere inconvenience. It represented an utterly catastrophic existential peril. Official doctrine unequivocally declared him to be simultaneously fully divine and fully human, yet paradoxically, without any earthly heirs. His pivotal sacrifice upon the cross was meticulously framed as the ultimate unparalleled offering, unrepeatable, singular in its redemptive power, serving as the sole gateway to salvation. If he had in fact begotten children, that sacred singularity would be irrevocably compromised. splintered into myriad possibilities. Consequently, salvation would no longer rest solely upon an individual's faith in the Church's teachings and sacraments. It might instead reside in flesh and blood, upon living descendants who inherently embodied both humanity and divinity, a corporeal manifestation of the sacred. Contemplate the profound ramifications. The sacred rite of the Eucharist, with its solemn promise of Christ's actual body and blood, would be reduced to a symbolic gesture only, for his true body, his true blood, might still flow tangibly in human veins, making the sacrament a mere representation rather than a literal presence. The Church's various sacraments, therefore, would no longer hold exclusive monopolistic power. Authority and divine grace could conceivably pass through family lines rather than through the established priesthood, through the sanctity of birth rather than through the exclusive process of papal ordination. This was the fundamental peril, that the very existence of heirs would dismantle centuries of meticulously constructed theology. Every creed, every catechism, every solemn declaration of faith would tremble at its foundations, facing an unprecedented challenge. The Vatican's uncontested prerogative as the sole mediator between an omnipotent God and fallible humankind would be called into serious question, its unique role diminished. What compelling reason would remain to prostrate oneself before the Roman See, if one could instead kneel before Christ's own living, breathing descendants, possessing a direct, tangible connection to the divine? Consequently, the established doctrine hardened into an uncompromising rigidity. Ecclesiastical councils declared Christ's divinity absolute and unqualified, his humanity purposefully divested of all familial ties. Mary Magdalene was systematically diminished, her historical role reshaped and relegated to that of a penitent sinner rather than a revered partner or disciple. Alternative gospels, those heterodox narratives, were branded heretical, their words silenced forever in the dark confines of caves and through the destructive power of flames. Each ecclesiastical mandate, each definitive pronouncement, served as a defense not merely of abstract belief, but of the Church's very existential perpetuation. And yet silence often betrays its own cryptic revelations. For why did the Church feel so profoundly compelled to defend with such vehemence against an idea it adamantly insists never even existed? What justified the brutal efficacy of inquisitorial tribunals, the fervent intensity of suppression, the seemingly endless and unrelenting campaign of historical revisionism? Some observers might reasonably posit that dogmatic frameworks exhibit vulnerability only when they harbor an inherent fear of contradiction, that the most vehement repudiations frequently mask the deepest, most profound insecurities. The peril to doctrine was not merely theological in nature, it was profoundly existential. To concede the existence of a bloodline was to irrevocably unravel the intricate tapestry of authority and narrative that Rome had meticulously woven across centuries. To accept the presence of heirs was to relinquish its exclusive guardianship, to concede that Christ's sacred legacy was not eternally locked away in heaven, but tangibly present and alive on earth. Its unique position would be rendered extraneous. It is hardly surprising, then, that the Vatican fought with such fierce determination, as though its very survival hinged upon the perpetual obliteration of this possibility. For in a profound sense, it truly did. Conventional conflicts are typically measured in the grand scale of battles fought, in the dramatic unfurling of banners, in fields stained with the visceral crimson of steel and blood. But the Church's most significant campaign was waged in an entirely different manner. It was conducted not with marching armies, but with the pervasive influence of silence, not through open conquest, but through the strategic art of omission. This was the Quiet War, an insidious conflict spanning centuries of systematic suppression, a campaign of deliberate erasure indelibly etched into the very fabric of history itself. It commenced with ecclesiastical synods that meticulously selected which gospels would survive to shape the accepted narrative and which would be condemned to perish into obscurity. It continued relentlessly through inquisitorial tribunals that incinerated dissidents for merely whispering forbidden stories. It was carried on through papal bulls that condemned entire spiritual movements, through archives meticulously purged of inconvenient manuscripts, and through entire dynasties systematically expunged from collective consciousness. Unlike the cacophony of armed conflict, this particular war left no visible battlefields. Instead, it left conspicuous lacunae, unfilled voids in ancient chronicles where significant names should have been recorded, eerie silences in venerable libraries where precious books once rested, tombs left deliberately unmarked, as though the very dead themselves were denied the dignity of remembrance. Contemplate the eradication of the Merovingians. They were not merely dethroned, but utterly dissolved from the historical record, their very existence obscured. Consider the Cathars, annihilated not only in body but in collective memory, their profound teachings reduced to ashes. Consider the Templars, destroyed in a swift and brutal conflagration, their enigmatic secrets submerged beneath whispers and silence. Each of these decisive acts was an integral part of the same overarching campaign, designed to ensure that no discernible trace of Christ's alleged lineage could ever survive in the light of day. And yet, the Quiet War never achieved total cessation. For silence, potent force though it is never absolute. Whispers endure resiliently where grand proclamations fall, legends slip through the subtle cracks of memory, defying oblivion. Symbols meticulously carved into ancient cloisters outlast ephemeral edicts, and sometimes, paradoxically, what is deliberately erased only shines more luminous in its very void. The Vatican's Quiet War thus reveals an inherent contradiction. By assiduously striving to obliterate the mere possibility of a bloodline, it inadvertently sustained the very conjecture. By silencing dissenting voices, it amplified their resonance in the collective imagination. By meticulously erasing stories, it transformed them into tantalizing enigmas waiting to be found and deciphered. Perhaps this represents the most profound paradox of all. In its zealous endeavor to extirpate the notion of Christ's heirs, the Church inadvertently guaranteed that the fundamental question would never truly die. For the very silence surrounding the issue became a tacit affirmation. Erasure itself transformed into eloquent testament. The Quiet War has no definitive triumph to proclaim. It persists still in sequestered repositories, in undiminished legends, in unraveled enigmas, and so the conflict continues, not through bloodshed, but through the unquenchable inquisitiveness of those who wonder. Those who persistently ask why so much was so meticulously erased. Those who intuitively feel that silence is rarely devoid of meaning. For perhaps the ultimate theater of conflict is not of earthly domains, but of the realm of human recollection. And perhaps the greatest war is not one of conquest, but of the struggle against oblivion. Even as invaluable manuscripts burned and venerable dynasties vanished into obscurity, some subtle traces of the prohibited narrative endured, not explicitly in words, but powerfully in symbols. Quiet, persistent, and unyielding, they manifested in the enduring forms of carved stone and stained glass, in traditional song and sacred ritual, diligently carrying memory through epochs when direct voices could not be heard. Take, for example, the ubiquitous symbol of the bee. To the Merovingians, it held a profound significance far beyond that of a mere insect. It was an emblem of eternity, of resurrection, of a sacred cosmic arrangement rooted in something far older and more primal than the authority of Rome. After their systematic erasure, the bee should logically have been consigned to oblivion along with them, yet it persists resiliently, intricately carved into ancient cloisters, elegantly embroidered into ecclesiastical vestments, and mysteriously resurfacing centuries later in royal heraldry. Was it merely decorative embellishment, or a subtle homage to a lineage never genuinely eradicated? Alternatively, contemplate the pervasive fleur-de-lis, blossoming ubiquitously across the landscape of France as a potent symbol of kingship. Officially, it was presented as a mark of purity, a direct representation of the Virgin Mary. Yet, some discerning observers perceive in it the lingering echo of Mary Magdalene herself, the sacred lily of a clandestine lineage carried westward from the Holy Land. When French monarchs bore this emblem proudly, were they primarily proclaiming their unwavering loyalty to Rome, or were they, perhaps unwittingly, perpetuating the very legacy that Rome had so assiduously attempted to erase? Within secluded sanctuaries nestled in the sun-drenched region of the Languedoc, intriguing celestial configurations mysteriously appear. Constellations are intricately carved into chapel ceilings, and mosaics are precisely aligned with the solstices. To the uninitiated eye, these are merely exquisite works of art. To the initiated, however, they are perhaps sophisticated maps, profound reminders that Christ's enduring story was inscribed not solely upon the earth, but also in the heavens, inextricably tied to cosmic cadences that lay utterly beyond the control of any ecclesiastical dictates. Ancient practices, it would seem, served as quiet repositories for fragments of enduring truths. The beleaguered Cathars, for instance, whispered of a book of love, a sacred tome tragically consumed by flames. Yet its essence lived on through hushed oral traditions. Troubadours, those lyrical poets of medieval Europe, wove intricate songs about the Holy Grail, portraying it not as a simple, hallowed chalice, but as a vessel deeply human, meticulously concealed and vigilantly guarded. Secret fraternities, operating outside the mainstream, diligently perpetuated esoteric rites, even as the precise origins of these ceremonies may have become somewhat veiled by time. Symbols, potent and enigmatic, were passed from hand to hand, akin to flickering torches illuminating a clandestine pathway through the encroaching darkness. These subtle emblems were never overtly declared, nor vociferously proclaimed. Instead, they endured with a quiet, almost knowing resilience, as if understanding that an understated presence was their sole safeguard against the pervasive and often ruthless scrutiny of the Vatican's formidable authority. Yet, when meticulously assembled and viewed collectively, these disparate elements coalesce into a rich, intricate mosaic. The industrious bees, the pristine lilies, the celestial stars, the melodic strains of ancient songs, the barely audible whispers, each individual piece, though small, fragile, and unremarkable in isolation, collectively sketches the compelling outline of a profound narrative that steadfastly refuses to succumb to oblivion. One is compelled to pose a fundamental question. If the direct lineage of Christ truly reached its terminus at Calvary, what profound imperative drove so many subsequent generations to painstakingly preserve such cryptic symbols? Why would individuals willingly undertake the perilous risk of carving forbidden emblems into unyielding stone, intricately weaving them into luminous stained glass, or subtly encoding their secrets within complex, poetic verses? The sheer dedication to such an endeavor suggests a deeper, unspoken motivation. Perhaps the profound impetus for such acts of preservation arose from an inherent, insistent demand of collective memory itself, or perhaps, more simply, it was because a complete and utter silence, an absolute eradication of truth, could never be fully achieved. And so, these powerful symbols persisted, conveying their profound secret not through explicit verbal declarations, but through their very palpable presence. To this day, they remain subtly embedded within our cultural landscape, etched into the secluded nooks of long-forgotten chapels, ingeniously concealed within the intricate designs of noble coats of arms, and radiating a faint, ethereal glow from the artistic masterpieces of bygone eras. They stand as mute, unwavering sentinels, patiently awaiting their rediscovery and interpretation. When one endeavors to meticulously sift through the vast, often deliberate silences permeating historical records, the very act of questioning, of harboring doubt, paradoxically transforms into a compelling form of testimony. For if there genuinely existed no narrative or claim requiring suppression, why would the ecclesiastical authority dedicate countless centuries to the arduous and often brutal task of its eradication? This persistent effort itself suggests a substantial, undeniable presence. A persistent sense of uncertainty, much like a pervasive shadow, continues to hover at the periphery of every significant ecclesiastical council and every authoritative decree. One recalls the pivotal Council of Nicaea, where numerous alternative gospels and divergent theological perspectives were systematically rejected and suppressed. Then there was the terrifying era of the Inquisition, during which even the faintest murmurs of prescribed narratives were met with the ultimate penalty of immolation. Furthermore, the elaborate ceremonies surrounding the anointing of monarchs were meticulously orchestrated with immense pomp and circumstance, explicitly designed to unequivocally assert that all legitimate temporal authority emanated solely from the See of Rome. Superficially, each of these actions presented an unyielding declaration of absolute conviction. Yet, beneath this veneer of unwavering certainty, a persistent, unsettling doubt perpetually flickered. It is a fundamental observation that established institutions seldom engage in combat against mere phantoms or insubstantial shadows. Rather, their formidable resources are typically marshaled against tangible threats. Consequently, the more unyielding and persistent the campaign waged by the Church, the more one is compelled to ponder the true nature and magnitude of the challenge that so profoundly instilled fear within its hierarchy. Consider the profound implications. Why would the gospel of Mary be consigned to the destructive flames, unless its message contained a perspective or a voice deemed far too potent and subversive to be permitted? Why were the Merovingian kings, a lineage of ancient French rulers, so thoroughly and systematically expunged from historical prominence, unless their very bloodline harbored a latent claim to authority that could directly challenge the supremacy of Rome itself? And why were the Knights Templar annihilated with such unparalleled ferocity and ruthlessness, unless their vast holdings encompassed something far more significant and perilous than mere wealth, land, and fortified castles? The Holy See steadfastly asserts that Jesus Christ left no biological descendants. Yet, the fervent intensity of its repeated denials has consistently overshadowed the original query itself, echoing with an almost desperate insistence. For a great many observers and scholars, this pronounced vehemence naturally engenders considerable suspicion, suggesting a deeper underlying motive. Indeed, truths of an absolute and undeniable nature require no elaborate defense mechanisms or vigilant guardians. They inherently remain unassailable, impervious to challenge, and wholly devoid of apprehension. It is, conversely, the more tenuous truths or potentially perilous secrets that necessitate such an extraordinary degree of oversight and relentless vigilance. In this discerning analytical framework, the very presence of doubt paradoxically transmutes into a form of compelling evidence, not as a confirmation of absolute certainty, but rather as a powerful testament to the enduring presence of possibility. Thus, the sheer magnitude of the methodical effort expended to obliterate certain narratives strongly implies that a substantial and significant something did, in fact, exist and warrant such drastic measures. The pervasive, deliberately constructed silence itself serves as an eloquent, albeit unspoken, witness to this hidden reality. Furthermore, the rich tapestry of ancient legends only serves to further intensify the pervasive mystery. Accounts circulate of distinguished families residing in southern France, who steadfastly maintain a lineage tracing back to a concealed, sacred child. Covert fraternities are rumored to meticulously safeguard esoteric symbols intrinsically linked to Mary Magdalene. And the lyrical compositions of the troubadours frequently allude to the Grail, not merely as a sacred chalice, but provocatively as a vessel containing a hallowed bloodline. One is left to ponder, are these merely imaginative fictions, or are they profound echoes of a fundamental truth that the Church vehemently strove to enter? Perhaps the profound solution to this enigma resides not within the readily accessible corpus of established knowledge, but rather within the vast expanse of what was intentionally rendered unknowable. We encounter a historical narrative meticulously sculpted through strategic omissions, official archives systematically purged of inconvenient names, and invaluable manuscripts ruthlessly condemned to the consuming flames of ash. This represents the deliberate and meticulous construction of a profound silence precisely where a vibrant and enduring memory should have flourished. And yet, despite these concerted efforts, a profound silence is never truly devoid of content. Instead, it reverberates with an almost palpable resonance, akin to the solemn peal of a bell struck within the quiet confines of a cloister at the dead of night. Its persistent echo serves as an insistent mnemonic, recalling what once existed. While the Vatican may have successfully suppressed numerous vocal dissenters and alternative narratives, it demonstrably failed to quell the burgeoning tide of skepticism and doubt. Ultimately, this very doubt may emerge as the most resounding testimony, proclaiming that somewhere, meticulously concealed beneath centuries of systematic obliteration, a prescribed truth once vibrated with life. Even though numerous centuries have elapsed since the pivotal ecclesiastical councils and the brutal inquisitorial campaigns, the fundamental question concerning Christ's potential lineage has never completely vanished. It continues to subtly permeate ancient archives, to animate enduring folk legends, and to be unexpectedly rekindled by serendipitous discoveries that reawaken the human imagination with fresh vigor. Even in the contemporary era, faint murmurs regarding Christ's purported bloodline persistently resurface, steadfastly refusing to recede into oblivion. A notable instance occurred in 1891, when a humble French priest, Béranger Saunière, commenced extensive renovations on his modest church, situated in the secluded village of Rennes-le-Château. The precise nature of his discoveries within the church remains enveloped in profound mystery. Concealed within hollow pillars were parchments rumored to contain intricate genealogies, cryptic codes, and potentially even veiled allusions to a sacred ancestral lineage. Irrespective of the precise nature of his enigmatic findings, they undeniably ushered in an era of unexpected affluence, accompanied by peculiar alterations in his conduct and a lingering aura of suspicion that persists to this very day. Consequently, his church continues to attract a steady stream of dedicated seekers who are convinced that its ancient stones conceal the profound secret of Christ's direct descendants. During the 20th century, a collection of intriguing documents emerged within the hallowed confines of the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. These papers, collectively designated as the Dossier Secrets, boldly asserted that the ancient Merovingian dynasty was directly descended from the union of Christ and Mary Magdalene, and furthermore, that a clandestine organization, the Prieuré de Sion, had assiduously safeguarded this profound truth throughout the preceding centuries. While academic scholars largely dismissed these documents as elaborate forgeries, the fundamental questions persist. What compelled the creation of such extraordinary claims in the first place? And why did they manage to enthrall and captivate such a vast and diverse audience? A profusion of scholarly works and speculative theories rapidly ensued. Certain interpretations began to perceive the legendary Holy Grail not as a mere physical chalice, but rather as a symbolic representation of a sacred bloodline. Other researchers meticulously charted esoteric symbols and intricate genealogical connections across the sprawling landscapes of Europe, frequently unearthing compelling patterns in regions where the officially sanctioned historical narratives presented conspicuous lacunae. This compelling concept swiftly transcended the boundaries of academic discourse, permeating popular culture and inspiring a plethora of influential novels, captivating films, and an unending stream of public speculation. For a significant number of adherents, the sheer, unwavering persistence of this extraordinary narrative served as an intrinsic indicator that the memory of Christ's potential descendants was fundamentally indelible, incapable of complete obliteration, and could only be effectively camouflaged within the rich fabric of myth and legend. Even within the hallowed and heavily guarded confines of the Vatican's own subterranean vaults, a palpable sense of apprehension and suspicion continues to linger. The notorious secret archives, comprising thousands upon thousands of shelves meticulously concealed beneath the ancient foundations of Rome, largely remain impenetrable to external scrutiny. The burning question persists. what precisely reposes within these clandestine repositories. While select scholars are occasionally afforded fleeting glimpses, they are invariably denied access to the complete collection. Whispers and conjectures abound, suggesting the presence of sequestered gospels, papal correspondence that inadvertently concedes more than official doctrine permits, and irrefutable evidence deliberately withheld from the devout for centuries. Regardless of the veracity of these claims, the sheer, unyielding secrecy surrounding these archives intrinsically fuels the enduring mystery. Furthermore, scattered across the ancient landscapes of Europe exist numerous families bearing unassuming names, yet who steadfastly assert a lineage predating even the most venerable royal houses. Their intricate genealogies are often convoluted and shrouded in obscurity, but certain members persistently maintain that their very blood flows with a sacred current, an ancestral inheritance meticulously transmitted since Mary Magdalene is said to have traversed the Mediterranean Sea accompanied by a young child. While such extraordinary claims remain inherently insusceptible to definitive proof, they are, paradoxically, equally impossible to entirely disregard. The contemporary world justifiably prides itself on its unwavering commitment to empirical evidence, rigorous scientific inquiry, and the undeniable veracity of verifiable facts. Yet, even within this enlightened epoch of reason, the compelling narrative of Christ's potential bloodline persistently endures. This resilience may stem from the inherent truth that even the most thorough acts of erasure invariably leave discernible traces. Or perhaps it is because silence, in its profound emptiness, paradoxically functions as its own eloquent testimony. Alternatively, and perhaps most poignantly, it could be attributed to the innate human yearning to believe that Christ's profound legacy did not irrevocably terminate on a desolate hill in Jerusalem, but rather subtly persists, concealed, delicate yet unbroken, within the vibrant veins of his living descendants. And so, the subtle murmurs concerning this hidden narrative persistently resonate, manifesting in ancient parchments and modern papers, captivating audiences in popular novels and cinematic productions, and drawing visitors to churches where tourists kneel, not solely for spiritual devotion, but also in pursuit of an elusive mystery. While the Vatican's protracted campaign may have successfully interred the story for a time, in our contemporary era, these compelling whispers are undeniably resurfacing with renewed vigor. Throughout countless centuries of systematic suppression, enduring periods of violent persecution by fire, and deliberate cultural silences, one singular, provocative idea resolutely refuses to be extinguished: the profound notion that Christ's sacred blood continues to course quietly and invisibly through the living veins of actual descendants. This enduring lineage, or perhaps the persistent belief in it, metaphorically resembles a gossamer thread, as delicate and fine as spider silk, yet possessing an astonishing resilience that has allowed it to span and connect the vast expanse of millennia. Certain hypotheses suggest that this sacred lineage was transmitted through the Merovingian dynasty, only to recede into profound obscurity after the systematic eradication of King Dagobert's royal line. Conversely, other proponents contend that it subtly persisted through a network of less prominent families, meticulously concealed beneath assumed identities and vigilantly protected by layers of clandestine secrecy. It is envisioned as a vital thread intricately woven into the very fabric of European history, becoming entangled with numerous dynasties and strategic marital alliances, yet, remarkably, never truly severed. Enduring legends originating in the sun-drenched regions of southern France adamantly assert that Mary Magdalene embarked upon a momentous journey, carrying her child across the vast expanse of the sea, subsequently establishing and nurturing a distinct lineage within the tranquil valleys of Provence. The Cathars, prior to their brutal annihilation, were widely believed to revere a concealed gospel intrinsically linked to this very legacy. Furthermore, the Knights Templar, controversially accused of heresy, are speculated to have meticulously safeguarded tangible proof of this profound inheritance. Each disparate clue, each tantalizing fragment of information, consistently indicates not an ultimate extinction, but rather an astonishing and persistent survival. These enigmatic symbols, therefore, persist as indelible markers of this enduring thread of lineage. The industrious bees, the pristine lilies, and the celestial stars, found meticulously carved into ancient stone, intricately embroidered onto ceremonial banners, and thoughtfully integrated into sacred rituals, do not function as overt declarations. Instead, they serve as subtle, persistent reminders, silent yet potent testimonies affirming the continued existence of a profound, hidden inheritance. Indeed, even the very persistence of pervasive doubt subtly implies an unbroken continuity. For the Vatican's relentless campaigns of historical erasure, its brutal inquisitions, and its vehement denials appear ceaseless and unending. One must critically inquire, why would such an formidable institution continue to wage such an arduous battle if the perceived threat had genuinely dissipated long ago? Why would it persist in silencing with such ferocity if, in reality, there remained nothing substantial left to suppress? It is conceivable that this sacred thread remains unbroken precisely because it was never destined for severance. Perhaps direct descendants of this profound lineage still discreetly move amongst us, existing anonymously and largely unnoticed, their individual names having faded from the official annals of history, yet their very blood meticulously carrying a profound secret that the formidable power of Rome could never truly appropriate or extinguish. If this compelling hypothesis holds true, then the most extraordinary narrative is not meticulously inscribed in ancient chronicles or grandly chiseled into monumental stone. Instead, it is profoundly embodied within the living physiological form, resonating in every vital breath and every rhythmic heartbeat of those individuals who silently bear this concealed legacy. And even though their specific identities may forever elude our knowledge, the sheer, unwavering persistence of the legend itself serves as sufficient corroboration. A profound truth, it is argued, does not continue to haunt the corridors of history unless it retains a vibrant, enduring life of its own. This enduring, unbroken thread of lineage, though imperceptible to the casual observer, nonetheless profoundly intertwines the distant past with the unfolding present. It stands as a potent reminder that what the Vatican vigorously endeavored to obliterate may not have been utterly annihilated, but merely meticulously concealed, patiently awaiting those discerning individuals who possess the will to perceive it. And if this extraordinary proposition is indeed factual, then the narrative of Christ is far from concluded. It persistently unfolds in clandestine ways, veiled in shadow and resonating within profound silence. While it is universally acknowledged that every narrative must eventually reach its conclusion, some denouements are not, in fact, definitive endings at all. Rather, They manifest as profound silences, soft, intentionally crafted, and perpetually unresolved. The compelling tale of Christ's conjectured bloodline unequivocally belongs to this category of enduring silences. The Vatican's protracted and merciless campaign against inconvenient memory was waged with unrelenting ferocity. Ecclesiastical councils systematically repudiated and excluded alternative gospels. The terrifying inquisitions ruthlessly silenced countless perceived heretics. Established dynasties were summarily deposed. Invaluable manuscripts mysteriously disappeared. Sacred symbols were painstakingly concealed within the very fabric of stone. Yet, despite this monumental expenditure of effort and power, the fundamental question continues to linger, neither vanquished nor utterly extinguished, merely interred beneath layers of history, hushed but undeniably present. The mind naturally grapples with a profound paradox. If indeed no significant secret existed, what then compelled such extensive and systematic obliteration of information? Similarly, if there were truly no grounds for apprehension, why did a pervasive climate of dread persist for countless generations, casting a long shadow over history? These inquiries demand contemplation, suggesting a deeper narrative than surface appearances might indicate. Such challenging inquiries ascend like fragrant tendrils of incense within the hallowed confines of neglected chapels, saturating the atmosphere long after the final liturgical supplications have faded into antiquity. It is conceivable that the very absence of sound, the profound quietude, constitutes the most compelling evidence. For silence possesses its own resonant voice. This pervasive stillness eloquently suggests the former existence of a powerful catalyst, an entity or idea that profoundly stirred the established order and consequently necessitated rigorous suppression. It further implies an unwavering conviction that collective memory could not be permitted to evolve organically. Rather, it was imperative that it be meticulously managed, stringently controlled, and ultimately expunged from historical consciousness. Yet, despite concerted efforts at obliteration, the subtle echoes, the persistent whispers, steadfastly endure across the European landscape. They resonate distinctly in the picturesque villages of southern France, where modest shrines dedicated to Magdalene continue to glow softly with the flickering warmth of votive candlelight. Testament to an enduring veneration, they linger amidst the formidable ruins of Montségur, where evocative legends of a concealed treasure, perhaps not of gold, but of profound insight, steadfastly refuse to dissipate into mere folklore. These whispers are also woven into the intricate narratives surrounding the enigmatic Templars, suggesting they might have meticulously safeguarded and transported invaluable forbidden knowledge into their subsequent exile. Moreover, the distinctive motifs of the fleur-de-lis, the diligent bees, and the celestial stars still subtly imprint the ancient stones of Europe, akin to faint yet resolute signatures of an ingrained defiance against historical revision. The formidable campaign waged by the Vatican, though perhaps successful in muzzling overt dissenting voices and suppressing direct testimony, ultimately proved incapable of extinguishing the human spirit's capacity for imagination. Indeed, once the faculty of imagination is roused from dormancy, it invariably establishes its own compelling form of veracity, crafting narratives that resonate deeply. Consequently, irrespective of whether the fabled bloodline possesses a tangible, verifiable existence, the sheer historical reality that it was perceived as a significant threat generating centuries of apprehension, is in itself sufficient to ensure its perpetual vitality and continued presence in collective consciousness. Therefore, as this contemplative journey draws to its conclusion, it is fitting to allow the profound silence to persist, to settle deeply. Let it lie heavily, akin to the immense cumulative weight of countless centuries, pressing down with an undeniable force upon the present moment. Within that very quietude, one is compelled to ponder a critical dichotomy. Did the ecclesiastical institution ultimately achieve triumph in its protracted conflict, or did it, in fact, falter? Did it effectively enter the elusive bloodline into oblivion, or did its very efforts inadvertently fortify it, transforming it into an even more potent and enduring legend by driving it beyond the grasp of tangible evidence? The definitive resolution to these profound inquiries will not be unearthed within the meticulously catalogued archives of officialdom, nor will it resonate from the echoing naves of majestic cathedrals, nor yet be definitively articulated within the authoritative pronouncements of institutional power. Instead, the true understanding will manifest solely within the serene, unobtrusive locales, amidst the subtle murmurs that steadfastly resist attenuation, and within the deep shadows where the collective memory steadfastly continues to respire. It is even conceivable that, in this very moment, the fabled bloodline moves discreetly among humanity, its presence unrecognized, its significance unacknowledged, yet unequivocally vibrant and enduring. The protracted, covert campaign waged by the Church might indeed have succeeded in interring a specific version of the truth beneath layers of suppression. Yet the resulting profound silence itself, ironically, continues to articulate a powerful and undeniable narrative.